Each year, more than 46 million Americans will seek emergency room treatment for an accidental injury, most of which are preventable. So, what are your risks, and who can you trust to protect you? This is Safety Matters with Russ Kenzior.
This is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kenzior. Thanks for listening to my show. I'm joined as usual with my producer, Tony.
Tony B, and we have a great show for you this morning.
Boy, we sure do, don't we? So, like every show, we start with
Safety Matters in the News.
Safety Matters in the News. So,
what's in the news, Russ?
Well, it always starts with coronavirus, and we're just going to recap.
Good.
What happened this week, because it really gets to be a little depressing. Most people already know that Dr. Fauci this week made the huge decision to now recommend people wear goggles.
It's the George Jetson theme all over again.
Yeah, the bubble.
The bubble.
Goggles. Goggles are really important because the coronavirus apparently has some mechanism of getting into your body through your eyes. And so he's recommending goggles and or face masks, face covers. So you got the gloves, you got the masks, face covers, you got the face shields. I see people walking around with those, and now goggles. And so that came out earlier in the week where he said, and this is a quote from ABC News, who interviewed Dr. Fauci, theoretically, you should protect all of the, I guess it's pronounced mucosal surfaces, where mucus is, eyes, nose, mouth, etc. So if you have goggles or an eye shield, I guess that's the same as a face shield, you should use it, he said. Okay, so we need to use goggles and or face shields, eye shields, to help kind of, keep us safe. They also, another update is CDC.
What do we have with the CDC?
We're going to talk a lot about the CDC today. CDC announced earlier this week, and this is from Forbes.com. Actually, this goes back to May. I take that back. CDC says possibly less than half of positive antibody tests are correct.
Oh, that's good. Half, 50%.
Yeah. In an updated guidance posted on its website over the weekend, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention acknowledged an inability to accurately determine if individuals had been infected with COVID-19 via antibody tests. If the test is used in a population where prevalence is low, it's possible then that less than half of those testing positive will truly have antibodies. Goes on to say the CDC has acknowledged that antibody testing can frequently be inaccurate, especially in populations where there is a low prevalence of coronavirus. In fact, under certain scenarios, less than half of those testing positive will truly have antibodies, the agency says.
Of course, in the news, they don't report that.
Well, remember, we heard last week testing is irrelevant.
And it's a former CDC.
Former CDC. So here we go. Testing is irrelevant. I guess you get false positives, negatives, maybe positive tomorrow. You test today, you may get it tomorrow. Also in the news, CDC Director Robert Redfield, we actually heard from him. He spoke at the House Coronavirus Committee yesterday.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it was an interesting...
He came out from underneath the desk.
Yeah, we find him now. He's out talking. But he was called to Congress to testify, and he said a couple of things that were really quite interesting.
What did he say?
He said, well, there are 5 things that can accomplish as much as shutting down the country.
Oh, of course. Here we go.
Okay, so we didn't have to shut down the country. All we have to do, according to CDC Director Robert Redfield, is 1, wear a face covering, which I think everybody in the country has been doing that. People, I think, even sleep in them. I see people driving in their car.
Absolutely, I do.
By themselves, wearing a face cover.
They're going to catch it from the air conditioning.
All right, so number 1, wear face covering. 2, social distance, which it's kind of like anti-social distance. We're used to not being close to each other anymore, which is going to have, I think, some lingering effects over time where people just aren't going to want to get close to another person.
Yeah.
Number 3, hand hygiene. Boy, we beat that to death with the hand sanitizers. He recommends, number 4, staying smart about gatherings. Does that include protests?
No, of course not. That's Fauci said. It's irrelevant.
Yeah, it's irrelevant. And 5th, staying out of crowded bars and restaurants. Here we go again. Get out of those bars and restaurants. He states, and this is a quote, "If we did those 5 things, we've done modeling data. We get the same bang for the buck as if we just shut the entire economy down."
There you go.
So had we just done that,
Shut down the churches. You know how that is.
had we just put on our face covering, social distance, washed our hands, stayed smart about gatherings, meaning avoid riots, and stay out of the bars and restaurants. Again, it's just bars and restaurants. I don't quite get it. That's the target. According to CDC Director Robert Redfield, that would have accomplished the same as shutting down the country. He then goes on to say that about school openings, because that's a hot issue right now.
Absolutely.
And this is a quote. He says, "It is in the public health interest of K through 12 students to get these schools back open for face-to-face learning.
Good.
We need to get on with it."
Good. That was good.
Yeah, good. So we're
Some positive.
Well, we're starting to see some movement. Who knows? Who knows if schools are going to open? There's a story that came out, I guess, a week or so ago where teachers were threatening to strike over school reopenings. In fact, this is from Fox Business News. It says, "One of the largest teachers unions in the nation is open to, quote, safety strikes, end quote, if states reopen schools without taking adequate steps to protect students and teachers from the coronavirus." The American Federation of Teachers approved a resolution, and this again is a couple weeks old, Tuesday of last week, outlining its requirements for reopening schools in the fall. What do you think they need to have? What do teachers need to have to make sure they and their students are protected from the coronavirus?
Goggles, gloves, face mask.
No, it's to defund the police.
What does that have to do with
Yeah,
the school system?
yeah. Well, that's what it has to do.
See, it sounds like it always boils down to that all this corona stuff is just political.
Well,
They use the science in a political manner. I'm sure tired of this corona stuff, Russ.
Well,
You
get
know-
in line. I mean, my wife tells me, "Why do you keep going out with this corona?" Well, it's relevant. I mean, and we got to get all sides of the story out. So,
Maybe we should interview businesses, the real, people on the street, on Main Street.
great idea. We need to bring in some folks who from, North Texas that are business owners that have been affected by this.
Right.
It's a great idea. Get your Big Chief tablet and number 2 pencil out. We got to find some people.
Yikes.
The story goes on to say the American Federation of Teachers wants schools to open only in communities with below 1% transmission rates, with accommodations for at-risk teachers. Not certain what that means. But anyhow, 1% transmission rates? I mean, where's that? That's basically saying we're not going back to school, probably forever, because there's always going to be some coronavirus issue. In fact, Tom Frieden said that, right? This is going to be around for years. So back to the CDC. CDC's Director Redfield stated in a interview, again with Fox News, that, he should, actually this is a comment about him. It says Redfield should sound alarm about suicides and coronavirus outbreak, critics say. This is a quote. "Self-harm is the number 2 cause of death amongst teenagers after accidents. Kills thousands a year. When you're comparing it to a virus that kills tens a year in that same age bracket, even a tiny increase in a percentage is going to be much bigger number." And we thought that might happen, and it has happened. Redfield addressed the suicide issue on July 14th during a Buck Institute webinar. He said, "We're seeing, sadly, far greater suicides now than we are deaths from COVID." And again, this information is a little old, but it's still relevant. Redfield said at the time, quote, "We're seeing far greater deaths from drug overdoses that are above excess that we have had as background than when compared to deaths from COVID."
I mean, there you have it. Here we are at Safety Matters, and this is not being reported.
We need to bring in somebody, maybe from the National Safety Council, an authority.
Yes, An expert.
An expert on drug overdoses, suicides, maybe even alcoholism, all the subsequent issues that have been kind of coming by way of the coronavirus. But before we segue into the next segment, I want to point out how big of a problem it is. And if any of our listeners have somebody that they're concerned about suicide, to contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. And so when we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the CDC, but also what are the risks that you might contract the coronavirus by sitting next to somebody on an airplane when we come back. This is America's Slip and Fall Guy, Russ Kenzior. Welcome back to the program. I'm joined by my producer, Tony.
Welcome back.
Let's talk just a little bit about airplane.
Let's do.
Airline safety, specifically as it relates to coronavirus. I took a flight a couple weeks ago to
Where'd you go?
Seattle. Went to Seattle. And first thing I noticed when I boarded the plane wasn't the face masks, face coverings. Everybody expected that. It was the flight attendant who greeted passengers at the door. And she, of course, had the gloves, the whole deal, mask. And she's handing passengers a little brown bag.
What was in the bag?
A little tiny bottle of water. I mean, the real small ones, you know. And then this little tiny packet of like hand sanitizer, maybe like 4 drops in there. But what's kind of odd is she was handing out the bags with these tongs. So she wouldn't even touch the bag.
Wow.
And that kind of sent this nonverbal, cue of, whoa, are we like in a hazmat situation here?
She's wearing gloves. She's got all the protection and still using tongs?
Still using tongs to hand out bags of water and right there when you get on the plane.
But at least they're, they're trying, right?
Yeah. In fact, there was a study that just came out, I guess about 2 weeks ago. This is an MIT report, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, suggested, and this is by way of a paper that is yet to be peer-reviewed, they pegged the risk of contracting COVID-19 from nearby passengers on a full flight of about 1 in 4,300. It says, according to the research, the risk drops to 1 in 7,700 when the middle seat is not booked. So...
I'd like to see that's a theory or just basically is it just an assumption?
Well, it's a anecdotal evidence at this point because it is yet to be peer reviewed. So we're not certain exactly how the study was conducted, what kind of plane, how many people on the plane, the air circulation system. Every plane's a little bit different. I don't know if you know this. I learned this a number of years ago, but when you're on a plane, they don't recirculate the air 100%. It's a small percentage of fresh air that's mixed in with the air that's in the cabin. So you're, in essence, when I flew to Seattle, it's a 4-hour flight. So you're eventually breathing all the air that was in the cabin that was exhaled by everybody else on the plane. I mean, right? I mean, it's not like the air where I sit is any different. And if you put the little vent on over your head, it just blows the recycled air even faster over you. But the risk is a risk. So flying is a risk. I mean, I'm curious, what's the chances of dying in a plane crash? Obviously, that's significantly less than getting coronavirus. But the airline industry certainly has their hands full. I mean, in fact, on the flight I was on, I recall 2 or 3 people actually asking the flight attendant, why are there people in the middle seat? I thought these flights were not supposed to have middle seats. I mean, that's kind of what the traveling population has been told, right?
Right.
No middle seats. Not certain if it makes a big difference. We do know that the type of mask you wear makes a big difference on planes, according to the CDC. And speaking of the CDC, for those in our audience that doesn't really know who the CDC is, they hear CDC a lot, Centers for Disease Control. They have a simple mission. It says CDC works, and this is right from their website, CDC works 24/7 to protect Americans from domestic and foreign threats to health, safety, and security. whether diseases start at home or abroad, are chronic or acute, curable or preventable, due to human error or deliberate attack, CDC fights disease and supports communities and citizens to do the same.
Well, I mean, that sounds like we should have something like that.
Sure.
I mean, it sounds like a good safety precaution measure, a good agency to have.
Yeah, and I have worked with the CDC and have tremendous respect for them. I have been to their headquarters outside of Atlanta several times.
Right.
They're highly capable. They have some of the most skilled and well-trained researchers in the world, undoubtedly. And of course, I work with them on the fall prevention issues, elder falls specifically. And so I'm a fan.
Yeah, so what you're saying, Russ, is that, it's not, we're picking on CDC only because these are things that that might need to change. But it's a good organization, correct?
Yeah, I mean, they're a great organization, and they are the premier health organization in the world.
And we need someone like that to kind of check out on the everyday, because we can't do it. Correct.
And, but like every government organization, they have their flaws. A lot of people may not know this. In fact, I didn't know this, but they're one of the most highly funded government agencies in the country.
How much?
You ready for this? $6.59 billion.
My goodness.
$6.59 billion budget. We covered last time the employees' income, the way they're staffed.
A room with a view.
Room with the view. They have a woodcrafter. Not certain what he does. Apparently that they pay to do woodworking. So they're a really, really big organization. They're very diverse. And again, back to their website, they have a section that says why we're here. They kind of describe who they are and why they're here. And they say, well, a disease threat anywhere can mean a public health threat everywhere. A safer world is a safer America. And I think we'd all agree with that.
Agreed.
They then talk about respiratory infectious diseases like coronavirus.
Right.
Including influenza, are the leading cause of pediatric hospitalization and outpatient visits in the United States. So there should be, and I assume they are, very well trained and prepared for respiratory diseases,
right?
Like coronavirus, and that's why I'm a bit taken aback, because
Yes.
I would have expected they would have been better prepared.
They would have been foresight on it.
Yeah, and have some advanced knowledge. When I hear, and we've all heard that this is a disease we don't know a lot about, the virus is new, that's got to scare every researcher. But on the other hand, it's in a family of diseases that I would assume CDC would have some experience with and be able to make some advances quickly. Now, we're waiting for the vaccine to come out. And one thing I did not know, Tony, do you know that if you work for the CDC and you patent something, you're paid royalties. You actually make money off of it.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So how much is Fauci getting?
Well, according to the U.S. National Library on Medicine, this is actually related to the National Institutes of Health, who Dr. Fauci works for. Mm-hmm. This is a story that came out a long time ago. This is from the publication from the U.S. National Library on Medicine, January 22nd, 2005, 15 years ago. It says, royalty payments to staff researchers cause new NIH troubles. The story says patients who took part in a clinical trial study at the U.S. National Institute of Health, NIH, had no idea that scientists at the institute received $8.9 million in royalty payments and might benefit financially for the use of their discoveries by pharmaceutical companies and device makers. That was, again, a report from the Associated Press. Says this information was not made public until the press agency obtained the information after filing a request under the Freedom of Information Act. So nobody knew that the folks that were actually doing the testing at the NIH were receiving financial royalties, feedback, or funding. The press agency has reported that 916 present and former NIH researchers received annual royalty payments averaging $9,700, but could receive as much as $150,000. At the time, NIH researchers spent millions of taxpayers' dollars studying the treatments that they had developed that were licensed to drug companies, the agency reported. So there's a relationship, financial relationship, between NIH researchers and the pharmaceutical companies, whereby research that's done and paid for by the U.S. taxpayer financially benefits the researchers, who, by the way, are paid quite a big salary.
And they get the royalty.
And then they get a royalty. I've never known a company that would allow that. I remember having a friend that worked for Texas Instruments, and he said, yeah, when we invent something, our name goes on the patent, but we as an employee of the company are not to benefit from the patent. That goes to the company. That's how I always thought it was.
Right. Same thing like at Frito-Lay and all these other companies.
Yeah, so the story goes on to say the press agency reported, and this is AP, that two leading researchers, Anthony Fauci,
there you go,
head of the NIH, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and his deputy, Clifford Lane, received payments relating to their development of interleukin-2 as a treatment for HIV/AIDS. Dr. Lane told the BMJ, that's the Journal of Medicine, that the payment was part of his federal compensation. So it's kind of like a bonus, I guess, or a commission. He explained that the government patented the development and shared the payments it received with the inventors. Since 1997, he has received about $45,000, he says. The Institute awarded $36 million in grants for studies to test the treatment. Dr. Fauci told the BMJ that that as a government employee, he was required by law to put his name on the patent for the development of interleukin-2, and was also required by law to receive part of the payment the government received for use of the patent. He said that he felt it was inappropriate to receive payment and donated the entire amount to charity.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Who would think that researchers at the National Institute of Health were kind of in their own business and they can profit off of their own research, and apparently there's some relationship, financial, with the pharmaceutical industry. It goes on to say both doctors told Associated Press that they had been concerned about an apparent conflict of interest for some time before the agency's story appeared.
You think?
But the BMJ was told by an NIH spokesperson that the NIH had no plans to put information about payments to its researchers on its website, and that the BMJ would have to make a request via the Freedom of Information Act to find out royalty payments to individual researchers. So there you have it. Who would have thunk it, huh? When we return, we're going to talk about OSHA, the CPSC, FAA, and TSA. Who are these organizations and what exactly are they doing to protect Americans?
You are listening to Russ Kenzier, Safety Matters.
This is America's Slip and Fall Guy, Russ Kenzier, joined by my producer, Tony.
Welcome back.
And we have been talking again about CDC. I would never believed that our federal government permits researchers who are paid and funded by the U.S. taxpayer to create cures, to do research, and then turn around and kind of sell it. According to Dr. Fauci, he said the law requires that they receive royalties. And there's some, this is part of their compensation. I mean, no other industry I'm aware of, Tony, can you go out and invent something while you're working for a company and just say, well, by the way, it's mine and I can sell it. But, who are they working for? I mean,
They're supposed to work for us.
I thought they were.
Protecting us.
I thought they were. And so...
And then, of course, the drug manufacturer, of course, when they have the vaccine, it's going to cost a fortune. Guess who's going to end up paying for it?
We spend $6.59 billion.
So we actually paid for that research.
Of course we did.
And they make it sound like we spent billions of dollars on this research.
Follow the money. Follow the bouncing ball. We paid for the research. Researchers, and God bless them, are working on a coronavirus vaccine.
Again, we need it.
We need it, and it's Godspeed. Hurry up.
Absolutely.
But as they are developing this product, this vaccine, at taxpayers' expense, how is it that the big pharmaceutical industries just say, thank you very much for all your research. Here's some money, Dr. Whomever. We're going to pay you a royalty, which is kind of like an incentive from the pharmaceutical industry. And then the pharmaceutical industry that presumably didn't have any investment in the research gets to go out and market the vaccine. And again, we need it. But something tells me, Tony, it's not going to be cheap. The cost of distributing the vaccine is obviously like every other vaccine, I presume, like when you get the flu shot. But is the big pharmaceutical industry going to be offering these vaccines for free?
Or even at a low cost. I understand you got it. There's.
I'm saying for free. I mean,
you think about it. You're right. We paid for it.
We paid for it. Now I understand there's a production cost, and the government may fund that.
Yeah, but a management. 10%, 20%.
Yeah, I mean, is that how it works now? The government does the research. The independent researchers kind of cash in. Somehow it's the law that they do. I mean, really? How many people know that? And then Big Pharma rolls in and says, thank you very much, and we're going to charge $100 a dose. So we get double dipped again. Welcome to America. Is that how it works? I guess that is how it works. And there's other government agencies I want to spend some time talking about. We hear the acronym OSHA, NIOSH, CPSC, TSA, FAA. Who are these organizations? OSHA. Let's start with OSHA. Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They got a big budget too. Not as big as a CDC. In fact, significantly smaller, but big. While CDC has a $6.59 billion annual budget, OSHA is $581.8 million. So they're far smaller. And the Occupational Safety and Health Administration was founded back in 1970. And prior to 1970, we really didn't have a government regulatory agency overseeing workplace safety. I spend a lot of time working with the folks at OSHA. Ed Folk, former head of Assistant Director for Labor. And by the way, OSHA is under the Department of Labor. Is a friend of mine. We may bring him on the show.
Because, again, it's it's a agency that is needed.
Sure. But most people probably don't know that OSHA is exclusive to workplace safety. It only applies to workers in the workplace. So oftentimes when I'm retained as an expert witness on a lawsuit, a lot of attorneys will assume OSHA applies. Well, if a person who's not an employee gets hurt on a work site, it's not a job-related injury. Now, it's an injury, and there's other avenues to pursue it, but OSHA only applies, and rightfully so, to protect worker safety. Mm-hmm. Again, they have a pretty big budget. I've been to their offices in Washington, D.C. In fact, I'm a trainer. I do a lot of training at and for OSHA outreach centers across the country. In fact, I do some training at Georgia Tech, OSHA outreach. So I spend a lot of time. I testified in front of OSHA when they were revising their walking and working surface requirements back, I guess, 10 years ago. And again, from my experience, very capable, qualified people, a bit bureaucratic, very slow. A new regulation takes decades to really ever come to light. In fact, the walking and working surface requirements that I was brought to Washington, D.C. to testify about was originally written, I think, in 1970, 71, and it took 26 years for the revision to become published. 26 years. There's literally people, Tony, who started their careers right out of college with OSHA, worked on this project, and were retiring, and it still wasn't passed.
My goodness.
The wheels of progress are pretty slow. There's another organization called NIOSH. You ever heard of NIOSH?
No, sir.
That's the research arm. That's the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. They're based out of West Virginia. They have a $342 million budget, again, smaller, but their focus is to develop new knowledge in the field of occupational safety and health and to transfer that knowledge into practice. They're actually part of the CDC, but they work with OSHA. All right, so when you hear NIOSH, it kind of sounds like OSHA. They're really not part of OSHA. They're part of the CDC. And they're a research organization that has, very simple goals.
That basically takes 26 years to
Well, it takes a while. I
They do the research, and then it takes 26 years to get it approved.
See, that's the downside of government. I mean, even when they're effective, it literally they move its snail's pace. But NIOSH is really conducting research to primarily reduce worker illnesses and injury. I've been to their headquarters in West Virginia. I've attended seminars. I've worked with NIOSH. In fact, NIOSH actually recommends the National Floor Safety Institute's standard, the B101 standard for measuring slip resistance of floors. Highly capable people, very research intensive. But again, the process, and it's really not their fault. It's just government. I mean, the process takes forever to get anything done. Speaking of which, there's another organization called the Consumer Product Safety Commission, CPSC.
And what do they do?
Well, they have a even smaller budget and smaller staff. I think they only have like 400 employees. But the CPC, as they're known, has a $127 million budget. And they're charged with protecting the public from unreasonable risks of injury or death associated with the thousands of types of consumer products under the agency's jurisdiction. And I'm reading from their website. Deaths, injuries, and property damage from consumer product incidents cost the nation more than $1 trillion annually. And that the CPSC is committed to protecting consumers and families from the products that pose a fire, electrical, chemical, or mechanical hazard. CPC's work to ensure the safety of consumer products such as toys. That's where we usually hear about CPC, around Christmas time, when they're recalling a toy because a toy made in China that came in with lead paint.
Gotcha. They caught it.
Yeah, they caught it. So toys, cribs, power tools, cigarette lighters, they go on. A lot of household products. In fact, the National Floor Safety Institute submitted 2 petitions to the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. They're based out of Bethesda, Maryland. Been to their headquarters many times. Have met with the each individual member of the commission. Currently, there's 4 commissioners, and testified in front of the CPSC commission. A very able organization, very, very able group of people. They're small. Again, the process is very, very lengthy. And unlike the other groups, what I found about the CPSC is that they're kind of politically governed. Every one of the commissioners is appointed by the president, and that, of course, is ratified by the Senate. So if you become a commissioner on the CPSC, you're basically appointed by whoever's in office. And under this current administration, the Trump administration, they made it very clear we do not want regulations, period.
Gotcha.
No regulations. And so what's coming from the CPSC and other groups, regulatory agencies, is a whole lot of nothing, because the executive branch who appoints them really is not interested in regulations. And that's a whole separate discussion. In fact, we need to bring in Ralph Nader, a friend of mine, who really can speak about the subject of regulations. He's spending a lot of time on transportation issues. But let's go ahead, Tony, get your tablet out, and we're going to get Ralph on the show and have him talk a little bit about what's going on in the regulatory world. And again, it's like anything. You can over-regulate, where you're getting regulations that call for things that are just crazy.
Yeah, stifle.
Which stifles business, stifles industry. And then you have the opposite side. The pendulum swings the complete opposite direction, where you have, you have little regulation.
Right.
And in the case of the National Floor Safety Institute, we would petition the CPSC to mandate that manufacturers of floor coverings simply test their products and label them. So the consumer knows when they're going to the store to look for a label that tells them how slippery is the product. It was more educational than regulatory.
Absolutely. It's more advisable.
Right. It was simply a guide. These are based on national standards, and we petitioned them twice, as a matter of fact. The vote came down the same way, 2-3. We lost. And so the government decided we don't want the American public to be knowledgeable about how slippery the floor is that they're about to buy. And in our view, it's critically important because so many elderly people are victims of falls. Many of those take place, according to the CDC and other research, due to an unreasonably or dangerous floor, slippery floor. And so maybe the consumer would benefit, we believe they would, by simply knowing how slippery is the product that they're looking at purchasing before they install it, because the worst way you find out about the floor being slippery
After.
and that's what we're finding now. But it was a close vote. Unfortunately, we lost. We will be back to the CPSC with yet another proposal. But when we come back, we're going to be talking about transportation safety, TSA, FAA, NTSB, the organizations that are governed by our federal government to look out for our health and safety as it relates to transportation.
You are listening to Russ Kenzier, Safety Matters. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Safety Matters. This is Russ Kenzier, my producer, Tony.
Welcome back.
We are going to talk this segment about transportation safety. FAA, TSA, NTSB, the organizations we see all the time when we go to the airport, they actually do more than just airline safety. So let's start with the FAA. FAA has a ginormous budget, $17.7 billion. But what's interesting is that money is paid primarily by users, meaning people who are paying
Within the system, who are flying.
Yeah, and so it's paid by users to what's called the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. The FAA regulates civil aviation, and of course, their job is to promote safety.
Which they've done a very good job, don't you think?
Yeah, they've done an excellent job.
We have the safest flying industry in the world.
Correct. In fact, the risk of dying in an airplane crash is infinitesimally small. In fact, so small, when it makes the news, it's because it was so rare.
Right.
By the way, speaking of that, there was a plane crash yesterday. Alaska Airlines had a midair collision, which actually killed a GOP state lawmaker and 6 others. This was in Anchorage, Alaska. 7 people, including the Alaska state lawmaker, died Friday when 2 small airplanes collided in midair near the airport of Soldotna, a small community on Alaska's Kenai Peninsula. Alaska state troopers said that Representative Gary Knopp, 67, of Kenai, was the sole occupant of the one plane. The other plane was flown by a local pilot and carried a guide from Kansas and 4 people from South Carolina. The National Transportation Safety Board is investigating the fatal incident, which occurred just before 8:30 a.m. So, who is the National Transportation Safety Board? Well, that's another government agency, the NTSB. They have a $110.4 million budget, and the NTSB is a small, independent federal agency. Their responsibility is for investigating transportation accidents, conducting transportation safety studies, issuing safety recommendations. They also aid victims, families after an aviation and passenger rail disaster. So they're
and another good agency. I mean, they do their job.
Yeah, in fact,
keeps everything safe.
Yeah, in fact, I mentioned bringing on Ralph Nader, and a lot of people either love him or hate him. Depending who you are. This show's all about getting people out with their opinions. And whether you like Ralph Nader, you don't like Ralph Nader, he's a friend of mine. I like him. We're going to get him on the show. And I want him talking about transportation. It's an issue right now, regulations. And part of the reason why is because he lost a niece on a 737 MAX aircraft. I mean, he has a personal investment in airline transportation fatalities because he lost a family member. And so we're going to bring Ralph on. We also have to talk about other organizations that are connected to, the TSA, for example, connected to airline safety, the TSA. What do you know about the TSA, Tony?
Well, they're there to protect, especially after the Homeland Security and all that stuff that happened during the 9/11. We need to have a better, visualization or make sure that our airline industry remains safe.
Yeah, and the TSA, we all know them when you go to the airport. Those are the first line of defense. Those are the people screening passengers, verifying identification, running all your, bags through the X-ray machine. And they serve a critical role. They're kind of on the front line of safety. And they go back to 2001 when they were founded right after 9/11.
Right.
Right after 9/11, TSA came to light. Now, for those of us who fly a lot, you kind of think they've always been around. It's like, what's new? But they are new. They've only been around for less than 20 years. And again, they work in tandem with the FAA to ensure airline safety. They don't work for them. The TSA, if I'm not mistaken, is part of the Department of Homeland Security.
That's what I thought.
So that's the role they serve. FAA is really about ensuring the plane safety when it's in the air.
Right, the aircraft itself.
Right. The airports themselves, a lot of people don't know this, but most airports are built and funded by local communities or what are called boards. Here in Dallas, we have the DFW board, and they're regulated by the local community, DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth. And so you have government intervention, you have government regulation, and you have support, and it all goes towards making airline safety a little bit safer because, it matters. People's lives are at stake. If you're in an airplane and it catches fire, that's a massive problem. That's not something that you can just pull over real quickly and get out of the car, for example, if you're driving. But what we find, especially in airline safety, is these crises. Every time a plane crashes, it makes the headlines. And the reason it makes the headlines is because they're so rare.
Right.
The first thing people think when there's a plane crash, or, let's just back up. Let's talk about regulations. There are people who like government regulations, regulatory agencies. They're very supportive of that. And there are people who oppose it. We have too much regulation. There's two sides of that equation.
Right.
What I always found, again, in my work as an expert witness, is everybody seems to think there's too much regulation until something happens to you.
Then they throw a ton of regulation at it.
No, I'm just saying, say somebody in your family got hurt. Well, prior to that, you were like, the government needs to stay out of my hair, get out of my way. They're just bad for business, whatever. And then somebody in your life gets hurt. And the first thing you say is, well, where's the government? Where's the regulator?
Right.
So it's easy to say we have too much, and then it happens to you. In fact, very common in slip and fall cases. Very common. Most plaintiffs that file slip and fall lawsuits never filed a lawsuit. And many of them are very conservative people who think that, people that file slip and fall lawsuits are scammers until they lost their mom.
Right.
Then all of a sudden it's, no, this is really important and I need to hire a lawyer and we need to, why did they allow that floor to be so dangerous?
It hits home, doesn't it?
It does. So if you're distanced from regulations, from the regulatory industries, you have a certain perception that what they do is meaningless until it happens to you. Then it becomes of utmost importance. The organizations I spoke about, with the exception of FAA, I have personal knowledge of all of them. I've worked with them. I've testified in front of them. I've been in this business for many, many years. I see the warts and I see the good things that they do. So when I take criticism or am critical of some of these government regulations, it's because I give a damn. I want them to do a better job.
Amen.
And it does take pressure sometimes from outside the regulatory system to really bring them to their focus because they become very bureaucratic over time or technocratic.
You have to find that middle ground.
Yeah, so we look at, what's the crisis of the day, Tony? It's always the media's got the crisis of the day. What's today's trigger?
Of course, coronavirus.
Yeah, we have a surge, we have tsunamis. What's the crisis? And that's where the media tends to focus when it comes to safety is crisis. Once the crisis is resolved, you just don't hear about it. It's as if it never happened.
It goes away.
Did you ever think about that?
Yes, I know.
So you ask yourself, well, what's the crisis of the day?
It's like I kind of think that after this election, I think the crisis is going to go away.
Well, we know one thing. Or I think we know one thing, and that is if President Trump wins, he'll probably face another impeachment round. And if Vice President Joe Biden wins, it'll probably just go away. And I say that only based on my experience. And it's cynical, but gosh, there's just so much hype about this. And so what I did, a little research, I went back and I wanted to find out what were the top 100 news stories of 2019. What were the crises of 2019?
Oh yeah, we spoke about that last week.
Yeah, because we hear a lot about the crisis.
You forget about it. That was last year.
Right. Remember last year, or maybe it was a couple years, ISIS. Remember ISIS?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God, ISIS. ISIS was going to destroy the world. And President Trump came in, I think it was 6 months, and all of a sudden ISIS is gone. But we don't hear about ISIS. Well, obviously there's still ISIS fighters there. I can't believe we got them all. North Korea. Oh, my God, every time Kim Jong-un launches a rocket into the Sea of Japan, it's a crisis, right? Kim Jong-un is going to start a war. Or Iran, right? International crisis, Iran, North Korea, ISIS, all this, Syria. Remember the Syrian refugees? That was another crisis. We hear nothing about it.
And what about all the border stuff, the stuff that was coming down from the South America?
So I did my research and I found, actually went to CNN.
Right.
And they have a list. It's called, and this is from December 22nd of 2019, CNN's top 100 digital stories of 2019. What do you think the number one digital story from the entire year from CNN was?
Immigration.
Nope.
Darn.
Sorry about that.
Darn that buzzer.
It was the fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Of course. We forgot about all of them. Then number two is the Hurricane Dorian. Remember, hit the Bahamas. Christ Church Mosque shooting in New Zealand. Number four was President Trump being impeached. Kind of goes down the list, but we forgot about it. I mean, it was yesterday's crisis. Not that there was anything solved, but we just went on to the next crisis. And that's how the media cycle works. We want to have a media hype because it's powerful. I mean, you can get people to tune in when there's a crisis. Nobody wants to tune in to hear good news, right?
No.
It's always bad news.
That's right.
But that's the reality. That's the world we live in. And this show is going to explore all of those factors, those issues that affect each and one of us every day as it relates to safety, and really cover ground. And we're going to hold the policy makers to their feet to the ground, and we're going to cover stories that are oftentimes covered but not in the detail we are. We're going to take a safety twist to every news story.
We show both sides.
Exactly. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody again for listening to the program. And based on what we're seeing in the news, we're probably going to talk a little bit more about coronavirus next week. I think we also have some guests that are going to be coming in.
That's right. We'll work on it, some local guys.
And we'll see where we go. There you go. We'll see where we go from there. But again, it's Russ Kensior. Thanking you again for listening to the program, and we'll talk to you soon.
Have a great week, ladies and gentlemen.